Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Something that I mentioned in the previous lecture regarding Surah Rahman is that the Ruh is from Allah and the words of the Quran are also words of Allah. And so this is the reason why hearts find satisfaction in the zikr of Allah, because the Ruh and the words of the Quran are both from the same maker. They are both from the same creator. And so, this is one of the reasons why Allah says that He taught us the Quran, and then He says that He created insan. So in this lecture, I just want to dive a bit deeper into this connection that the heart has with the Quran in particular. So in other words, why is it that hearts find satisfaction only in the zikr of Allah? And the reason I think this is very important is because a lot of our young generation nowadays, they have this question that why do I need to study the Quran? So if I'm doing my 5-time prayers, if I have some basic understanding of Islam and Quran that I was taught by my parents, why do I need to engage in tafseer? Why do I need to be attached to the Quran? And furthermore, they argue that, if the reason we need to be attached to the Quran is because the Quran is a reminder, it reminds us of our mission and of our purpose and so on. Well, in that case, I could always have my own form of daily reminders, right? So if the idea is just to remind myself every day of what my mission is and what my purpose is, I could make my own form of daily reminders. Why does it have to be the words of God? Why does it have to be the Quran? And this is also very important because nowadays, we have this era where there's so many speakers. There are motivational speakers, religious speakers, and many of us like to just listen to them instead of opening up the Quran and studying it and reading it for ourselves. So really the question is that, is it sufficient for us to just focus on other speakers and just to listen to them and their lectures on a daily basis? Or is it that we will still be missing out because our heart needs a connection with the words of Allah in specific? And at the same time, it is also important to address the other extreme, the other group of people who say that I spend a lot of my time studying the Quran, I spend a lot of my time engaging in zikr, but I don't feel any satisfaction in my heart. So if Allah says that hearts find satisfaction in the zikr of Allah, well, I'm doing that zikr, I am engaged with tafseer and with Quran, but my heart is empty and I have a lot of anxiety and stress, I don't feel any sukoon. So really to answer all of these questions, the one main verse in the Quran is in Surah Noor, verse 35. And this is where Allah explains the beautiful phrase, Nurun Allah Noor. So if we study this verse for a second, it says, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. The example of His light is like a niche within which there is a lamp. The lamp is within glass. The glass as if it were a beautiful, sparkly white star lit from the oil of a blessed olive tree, neither of the east nor of the west, whose oil would almost glow even if it is untouched by fire. Light upon light, Nurun Allah Noor, Allah guides to His light whom He wills, and Allah presents examples for the people, and Allah is knowing of all things. Now there is really in this verse, which is quite detailed, this verse contains the answers to all the questions that I started off this lecture with. But the problem is when you read the verse as I just have done, it's very hard to understand where the answers actually are. So this is where the tafseer is really important. This is where reflection and pondering is incredibly important. So first of all, Allah starts off by saying that Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, which basically means Allah's Noor is everywhere. It's all around us, right? So if we look at the skies, if we look at the earth, galaxies, universe, if we look at the plants, crops, everywhere around us, even if we investigate our own bodies, we can see the miracles and the signs of Allah in every single thing. And to say that Allah's Noor is everywhere also means that Allah's guidance is everywhere. So if you're talking about socially, politically, economically, in every sphere of life, Allah's guidance is present, and there is a lot of wisdom in Allah's commands and His injunctions. So to say that Allah's light is there in the heavens and the earth, it means that He is basically everywhere. You just have to open up your eyes and search for Him, and it's impossible for someone who is seeking the truth to not find God. And then of course, if we're talking about the heavens and the earth, then the most obvious object which contains all the Noor of Allah is the Quran, which contains the actual words of God Himself. But as you continue studying the verse, it explains that there is another kind of light. So there is one light that is external, right? There's light all around us. But it seems to mention that there is a light also which is inside. It's inside some kind of a lamp. And the verse also says that Allah being the light of the heavens and the earth, the example of His light is like a niche, and inside that niche is a lamp, and inside that lamp is a light, and so on. So what that basically means is there is a light outside, there is an external light which is all around us in dunya, and that is the Noor of Allah. But there is a light that is within some kind of a lamp that Allah seems to be describing, and that light inside a lamp is analogous. It is similar to Allah's brilliant Noor and Allah's light that is everywhere in the heavens and the earth. So really this verse is talking about two kinds of light, and both of them are basically Allah's Noor. There is a light outside, brilliant and shining, and there is a light inside a lamp which is also brilliant and shining. But what we now have to investigate and really ponder is that where is this inner smaller light that is inside a lamp? Where is this light exactly, which is also analogous to Allah's Noor? So when you look at the verse again, Allah's talking about, number one, there is a niche. Okay, a niche is basically like a wall enclave. You know, so sometimes when you look at a wall, there is a small enclave inside. And usually, you know, people hang things inside that enclave like a photo frame, or, you know, there's a small spotlight and they'll hang like a frame or something. That is called an enclave. That is called a niche. So in this case, Allah mentions that inside this niche is in fact a lamp. Okay, the lamp seems to have a light inside of it, but at the same time, the lamp seems to be covered by a glass. And when describing this glass, Allah says it's a glass which is as if it were a beautiful white star. Now, you know, when you look at glass, what we do know is that if the glass is completely spotless, okay, it's very, very well cleaned, there's no dust or dirt on it, then glass is going to be 100% transparent. Therefore, if there is a light inside, then it's going to be able to shine brilliantly through the glass because the glass is absolutely clean. But if the glass is slightly dirty, you know, so there are some certain stains of dust or dirt or oil on it, then we know that now the glass is not 100% transparent. It's what we call translucent. So if there is now a lamp inside of that glass and we switch on the light of that lamp, then not all of that light is going to be able to pass through the glass. The glass is not going to shine brilliantly like a beautiful star. It's going to shine, but not as much because it's translucent, since the glass is quite dirty. On the other hand, if you have a glass that is completely stained, it is very dirty, so dirty that it's almost as if there are black spots that are completely covering the glass, then none of the light that is inside will be able to come out. None of the light will be able to shine brilliantly. So far we can understand there is a niche. Inside that niche, there is a lamp. The lamp is covered by a glass, and inside that lamp, there is some light. Now, when you start to ponder and you start to ask, okay, what exactly is Allah talking about here? The niche or the enclave is very similar to our chest. It's the chest of the human being. So when you look at a chest, especially when you look at the rib cage is like an enclave, okay? And inside the niche, Allah mentions a lamp. Similarly, inside our rib cage, inside that enclave of our chest, there is one heart. So that heart, that qalb, is very analogous to the lamp. And then Allah mentions that inside that lamp, there seems to be this light, right? And I told you that the light that is inside this lamp is analogous to the beautiful light, the beautiful Noor of Allah that covers the heavens and the earth. So that must mean that the light which is inside our qalb is really the Ruh that Allah is talking about. And we know that it must be the Ruh because the Ruh is something that Allah has blown into us from Himself. That is why that light which is inside our heart is very much similar to the light or Allah's Noor that is everywhere. Because both types of light are actually from the same source. The light that is all around us, the light that is in the Quran, as well as the light that is inside, because both have come from the same source, God the Almighty. But then Allah also mentions that the lamp is being covered by a glass. And as I mentioned before, if this glass is spotless and clean, then the light will be able to shine brilliantly, otherwise it won't. In the same way, our qalb is covered by some kind of a layer, which is very much analogous to glass. If that layer that is covering the qalb, if it is spotless and clean, then all of the light, all of that Noor which is lying inside of our heart will be able to shine brilliantly. We will have a qalb that shines and emits all this Noor of Allah. But if the qalb is covered by this material, is covered by this glass which is quite dirty, then the Noor that is inside of us will not be able to shine brilliantly. And if the worst case is that our heart is completely covered by black stains, the stains of hypocrisy, then the Noor that is inside will not be able to shine out at all. Now what this really means is that if you have a qalb which is covered by greed, jealousy, arrogance, pride, hatred, the absolute love for this dunya, or of course hypocrisy, or perhaps you have an inferiority complex, so you're always thinking less of yourself, you're always ungrateful to Allah, you're never focusing on the things that Allah has given you, you always focus on the things that you don't have. That is also like a heart that is covered by a very, very stained and dirty glass. Because of that reason, since there are so many layers of dirt that are covering your heart, it is impossible for the Noor that is inside to shine outwards in a very strong and brilliant manner. Okay, so it's not that there's no Noor inside, it's just that we have chosen to cover our hearts with all kinds of wrong and evil things. And of course, in the extreme case, where our heart is covered by this glass which is 100% dirty, it's filled with black stains. There isn't even a small portion of it which is unstained, right? So the entire thing is filled with dirt. In that case, we become someone who is blind, deaf, and mute, as Allah explains in the Quran. And He calls them blind because that means that now we will never be able to see the signs of Allah, hear and properly understand the signs of Allah, because the ruh that is inside, its light just cannot shine out. It is just impossible. All of that light has been 100% blocked. So of course the aim is, if we want that light to shine out in a very brilliant manner, we have to keep the glass clean. And keeping that glass clean is analogous to keeping a clean heart, which means we have to build our levels of taqwa. Taqwa, as I explained before, is God consciousness. So the more we are aware of what God likes, and the more we try to strive for what Allah likes and abstain from what Allah dislikes, the more we end up cleaning that glass. So we will stay away from jealousy, we will stay away from anger, hatred, intolerance. We will be able to show kindness, generosity, mercy, forgiveness. You know, all the beautiful traits that make us Ashraf al-Makhluk. All of this comes just by improving or building our levels of taqwa. So to keep this glass clean, all we have to do is to keep building on that level of taqwa. The more we strive, the more that glass that was initially dirty starts to become clean. Those black stains of hypocrisy start to be removed. And so eventually we have a glass that is absolutely spotless and brilliant. Now coming back to the analogy, Allah explains that inside the lamp there is this light, and the light is being fueled by oil. And He mentions that this is oil from a blessed olive tree that is neither of the east nor of the west. And the oil is so pure, it is so highly combustible that it can catch fire even if it is untouched by fire. So it can start to burn even if the flame is very far away from it. And this is easy to understand. You know, when you look at, for instance, petrol is not that highly combustible, in the sense that you have to take a flame that is touching the petrol, and then the petrol will set fire. Or if it's quite pure form of petrol, then the flame has to be close enough to the oil for the oil to catch fire. Okay, and then of course you have a massive explosion. But in this case, Allah is talking about the most combustible, the most pure form of oil, that is an olive oil coming from a tree which is neither of the east nor of the west. So it's the kind of oil that is coming from this tree is incredibly pure, which means it is so combustible that even if you start a flame that is far away from the oil will still catch fire. You will still have an explosion that takes place. Okay, and to mention that this tree is neither of the east nor of the west, when you look at olive trees, an olive tree that is exposed to a lot of sunlight will be able to give olive oil that is very, very pure. Okay, on the other hand, if you have olive trees that are growing too much towards the east or too much towards the west, then that means that at times they are exposed to sunlight and at times they are not, because of course you have morning and you have night. So if it's too much towards the east or towards the west, it's only getting sunlight half the time. So the oil that is being produced from it is only going to be half as pure. But if you have a tree that is neither of the east nor of the west, so it is exactly stationed at the center of the earth, that means it is always getting sunlight, which means the oil that comes from this tree is going to be the most purest, most combustible form of oil that can ever be imagined by a human being. Now, in this case, we have to understand what is this oil analogous to. So we know that the light inside the lamp is similar to the ruh that is inside our qalb. But now Allah is talking about an oil. And it's an oil that ends up feeding the light which is inside the lamp. So what exactly is analogous to that? What is it that is feeding our ruh and keeps our ruh shining in this brilliant manner? And that is in fact the lub. This is the same thing that I mentioned in the previous lecture, that the lub is the core or the very center of the heart. It is about divine love. It's about wisdom. So when you really start to reflect and think about Allah, you start to fall in love with the divine, and you really, really try to practice Tawheed in all its three levels, right? Because the more you practice Tawheed, the greater your understanding is of God, and the more you're able to experience that divine love. So the more we try and practice Tawheed and abstain from shirk, and the more we try to reflect and really understand God, the more that lub shines. So this brilliant oil that Allah is talking about, which is feeding the light, that is really analogous to the lub, which is feeding the ruh. So when your lub is activated and it's strong, then it's feeding the ruh. If your lub is deactivated or it's lying dormant, then there is nothing that is supplying anything to the ruh. So your ruh gradually ends up losing its power. And at the same time, to say that, this is an olive tree that is neither of the east nor of the west, so it's always getting sunlight 24 hours. This is analogous to saying that, this is a human being who makes sure that every single day he's getting this constant supply, this constant dose of zikr. So, it could be someone who is studying the Quran, but at the same time, they tend to ponder and reflect if they go out and they work, if they are shopping, if they are, spending time with their family and friends. At all moments, they are pondering and they are searching for the signs of Allah. They are always conscious of the kind of words that come out of their mouth. They're always searching for wisdom, right? They're always engaging in zikr regardless of what they're doing. So this is similar to that olive tree that is being exposed to sunlight 24 hours. It's not a tree that is being exposed to light only half the time. In the very same way, this is not a person who ponders and thinks only half the time, and the other half he's just chasing dunya. This is somebody who, even if he's involved in dunya, in terms of his marriage, in terms of his career, his friends, he is always engaging in zikr, always pondering and thinking, and always conscious of Allah and Allah's commands, right? This is what gives him this brilliant lub that is shining so brightly, and that is also supplying this constant amount of positivity and energy to the ruh. So now, just to put everything together, Allah explained that there is a niche. Inside that niche is a lamp. That lamp is covered by glass, and inside that lamp is a light, and that light is being fueled by very pure, highly combustible oil. All of this is analogous to our chest, our sadr, within which we have our qalb, which is the heart, within which we have the ruh, that is analogous to the light, and that ruh itself is being constantly supplied by the lub, which is analogous to that very highly combustible pure form of oil. And at the same time, the glass that is covering the qalb is actually talking about taqwa. So the greater our levels of taqwa, the more pure and clean that glass is. The lower our levels of taqwa, the more dirty and impure that glass becomes. So now, taking everything into perspective, what is Allah talking about when He says Nurun ala Noor? He's speaking about a light of Allah's Noor that is outside, heavens, earth. It's the multiple signs, the multiple miracles of Allah that we see, as well as, of course, His beautiful Quran. And then there is a light that Allah is talking about, which is very similar to Allah's Noor. And we have been able to discover that is a light which is inside of our qalb, right? That is our ruh. So then how does Nurun ala Noor take place? Light upon light. What happens is that when an individual first works at cleaning his heart, so he first works at cleaning the glass, removing himself from the love of dunya, greed and jealousy. He works to try and improve his level of taqwa, trying to make himself a better version of himself. So basically, this is now someone who you would call a very good, a very decent human being, someone who shows a lot of generosity and kindness and mercy to other people. Now, after having cleansed his heart, if this is a person who now starts to ponder and reflect, he starts to ask the more important questions. Why has God even created us? What is our mission? What is our purpose? Why is there so much injustice in the world? Is there going to be a day of accountability? And he starts, investigating. He starts studying all the different kinds of sciences as well, all the different kinds of academics, because he's trying to find the answers to his questions. So as Allah said that Allah's Noor is in the heavens and the earth, he studies as much of dunya as he can in order to try and find the answers to his questions. So he's really searching for the truth, and he's searching for God. He's searching for his creator. And the more he searches, the more he ponders and reflects, or the more that he reflects on the verses of the Quran, what happens is he's allowing Allah's Noor to enter his heart. And Allah's Noor can enter his heart easily because his heart is covered by glass that is transparent. And being transparent, that means that light can travel through the glass 100%. It's not translucent, it's not opaque. So the more he ponders and reflects on the verses of the Quran or on the signs of Allah that are everywhere around him, the more that Noor of Allah is now entering his heart. Now, as we know that since the glass is clean and his qalb is therefore very clean, it's very soft, Allah's Noor is entering the qalb easily. But we just discussed that inside the qalb is the ruh, and the ruh is being fueled by this oil which is highly, highly combustible, and that is the lub. So what happens is, because the oil is so combustible, if there is flame that is very close to it, then the oil will instantly catch fire. In the same way, when this person allows Allah's Noor to even enter his heart, then that pure oil which is inside of his heart, in other words, that lub that I talked about, that lub suddenly becomes ignited. So that's when he starts to gain wisdom, right? So initially he was just absorbing Allah's Noor. He was just gaining knowledge of the Quran, knowledge of sciences. He was observing the world, but he kept asking and he kept reflecting and pondering. And as he reflected and pondered, the Noor was entering his heart. And as it entered his heart, it was able to ignite the lub that was inside. And this is how he suddenly was able to gain wisdom. So suddenly his eyes open to reality. He's able to see dunya from a very different perspective. His mindset has now changed. He's not feeling despair, negativity, complexes, or all kinds of weaknesses. Suddenly he feels energized. Suddenly he feels that, he can overcome any struggle because Allah is now with him. He feels as if God is, not just his master, but God is his friend. It's as if he has finally discovered Allah. And so as that lub basically catches fire, as soon as it becomes ignited, what you eventually have is that there is this brilliant light that starts to shine inside of that lamp. So suddenly that ruh, which was lying dormant inside of the heart, suddenly it is now shining brilliantly. So in other words, we all have the ruh that is inside, but the ruh is spiritually dead. It's not going to be able to do anything for us unless we don't give it the Noor of Allah that it's looking for. Unless we don't start to ponder and reflect and search for the signs of Allah, that ruh is going to remain spiritually dead. When Allah's Noor enters the heart and it ignites the lub, that suddenly you have this explosion and the ruh comes to light. And when that ruh starts to shine brilliantly, because the glass of the heart, as I told you, is 100% clean, all the light, that Noor that is being emitted from the ruh, is able to pass right through the qalb. And what suddenly happens is that person starts to emit light. And this is really, sometimes when we say that, I met this person and there was so much Noor on his face. Or, I met this person and, for some reason I felt so much love in my heart for this person, even though I barely know him. But, just the way that he was talking to me, the kind of amazing words that were coming out of his mouth, I felt this strong positive energy that was coming from him. And you might have noticed this because sometimes there are people, and if you just sit around them or if you just spend some time with them, you feel uplifted. You feel like, they've given you this injection of positive energy. And this is exactly what it means. So when we say there are some people who have so much Noor on their faces, what that means is really that the ruh inside has been ignited and it is shining so brilliantly that whoever sits with them or talks to them, they start to feel uplifted, right? It does not mean that the person actually has light that is shining out of his face. It just means that their ruh is shining so brilliantly that we can feel Allah's Noor just by sitting close to them. We feel uplifted and we suddenly feel the love of God whenever we are around those kinds of people, because their words of wisdom, their kindness, their generosity, it suddenly uplifts us as well. And this is what you call Nurun ala Noor. And so what this means is that when you look at Allah's Noor that is all around us, in the sense of the multiple signs of Allah that are present, and of course the ultimate, purest form of Allah's Noor, which is the words of Allah, the Quran, when that is able to enter a soft, clean qalb, and it's able to ignite the lub, and therefore allow the ruh to suddenly start shining, it causes an explosion to take place inside the person's heart. And when that explosion takes place, that is Noor upon Noor, Nurun ala Noor. Allah's Noor outside is combining with Allah's Noor on the inside, and you have a massive explosion. And the easiest way, in fact, to feel this explosion is when you are reading the Quran, because the Quran, being the words of Allah, they are in fact the purest form of Allah's Noor. So when you study the Quran and you allow that Noor to enter your heart, provided that your heart is clean, you have freed yourself from greed and jealousy and love of this dunya, you are not worshipping anything other than God, then when that Noor is allowed to enter the heart, it is able to ignite with the Noor of Allah inside the heart. So the Noor outside combines with the Noor inside, and you have a massive explosion. And that is when, we suddenly start to feel those tears come down. So we're studying the Quran and we cannot explain it, but we have goosebumps and we start crying. We suddenly have this weird affiliation, this strong connection with Allah, and we cannot even explain the feeling to anyone. So therefore, coming back to the question, why is it that, studying the Quran and, studying these signs of Allah, why is that the only thing that gives satisfaction to the heart? So if I choose to not study the Quran, if I choose to just, make myself busy doing my prayers, and you give myself my own form of daily reminders, or just listen to, motivational speakers or to religious speakers, why is that not going to be enough? And the reason is because the purest form of Allah's Noor is in fact in the Quran, because that contains the words of Allah, and the ruh that is inside is from Allah, so it is the exact same kind of Noor. It's the exact same kind of light. And so as a result, that's when the Nurun ala Noor, the explosion of light, happens the most. But then to answer this question, that why is it that if I'm studying the Quran, then why is it that, I just at times don't feel this Nurun ala Noor? Why is it that I'm studying the Quran, I'm studying the different surahs every day, I'm engaging in my zikr, but my heart is just empty, and I'm filled with anxiety and grief? And that could be for two reasons. Either the glass that is covering your qalb is very dirty, which means you're still attached to dunya too much. You still have too much greed and jealousy. You still have so much hatred and anger inside. There are still so many things that are blocking Allah's Noor from being able to enter that heart. So that could be one reason. The second reason could be that you have not activated the lub. So as I told you, the lub is like that purest form of olive oil that is highly, highly combustible. And as I explained, that if you have an olive tree that is always exposed to sunlight, it will give you olive oil that is very highly combustible. and it will catch fire very easily. But if you have olive oil from an olive tree that was not exposed to much light, then the oil that comes from that tree is not going to be easily combustible. In the same way, we all have a lub that is inside. And I told you also that that lub gets activated when we feel divine love, when we start to practice tawheed. So therefore, what that means is if we are involved in any form of shirk, and I explained the 3 levels of tawheed, which means if we are violating any level of that tawheed, and therefore practicing shirk, our lub is not going to be highly combustible, which therefore means that you can be absorbing Allah's Noor. Right? You might have a soft heart, you might be absorbing Allah's Noor, studying the Quran, studying the different signs of Allah, but you don't feel anything on the inside. You don't feel wisdom. You don't suddenly feel that strong connection with God. And the reason is because your lub is not combustible. Your lub is not catching fire. And it's not catching fire. That explosion is not happening. And it's not happening because you are too busy involved in shirk. The lub is only going to be of pure oil. It's going to be highly combustible. It's going to have that Noorun Allah Noor explosion if you are practicing Tawheed as Tawheed should be practiced. But if you are obsessing over someone or something, or you have extreme doubts about Allah, you have doubts about Allah's ability to be able to help you, so you have drowned yourself in negativity and despair, then in that situation, again, your lub is not of a very pure form and no explosion is going to take place. You have to first understand who God the Almighty is. You have to first understand Allah and all of His amazing and beautiful traits, and understand the 3 levels of Tawheed, understand the kind of brilliant God that we are talking about, and then that lub will be able to explode. Then you'll be able to have Noorun Allah Noor. And the third and final reason why perhaps this explosion is not taking place, why this burst of positive energy is not taking place, even though you're studying the Quran every day and you're studying all the surahs every day, is perhaps maybe you're not involved in shirk. Maybe you're not obsessing over someone or something. But the problem is you're not reflecting on the words of the Quran. So you are blindly studying different surahs every day, but you're not even thinking about it. So every day you tell yourself, okay, I have to study Surah Yasin, Surah Rahman, before I go to sleep, Surah Mulk, on Friday, Surah Kahf, but you're not actually pondering and reflecting on any single verse. So it's just blindly, you are just repeating it and you are reciting it, but you have no idea what you're actually reciting. You're not even asking yourself questions. You're not even studying the verses in detail. And because you're not pondering, you cannot possibly activate the lub. The lub, I told you, is basically wisdom. It's about wisdom. So you can absorb all the knowledge, but if you're not even concerned about pondering and reflecting, then you have a lub that is deactivated. And no explosion, Noorun Allah Noor, cannot take place. So these are 3 very important things that we have to take into account, and then hearts find satisfaction in the zikr of Allah. So at times when we say this verse to somebody, that hearts find satisfaction in the zikr of Allah, and people say, well, I've been doing it, but my heart seems to be dead. Then number 1, check the condition of your heart. Perhaps the glass covering it is filled with greed and jealousy, pride, ego, arrogance. You're the kind of person that who's quite self-righteous, and you cannot stand anyone telling you that you are wrong. Or perhaps you are so much in love with dunya, you're greedy, you're always jealous of people. So fix the glass that is covering your heart, because it's not allowing Allah's Noor to enter. Second of all, make sure that you are pondering and reflecting on the verses of the Quran. You are asking the right kind of questions. You are studying the multiple signs of Allah that are around you, and you're constantly asking questions. You're doing research, because that is what activates a lub. And third of all, make sure that you are practicing Tawheed. Make sure you're not engaged in any form of shirk. Make sure you are not obsessing over someone or something, because in that case your lub is not of a very pure form, right? So in other words, you might be somebody who is reflecting. You are asking questions. You are pondering, but still you don't feel Noorun Allah Noor. And the reason is because your lub is activated. It's activated because you are asking questions, but it's not a very pure form of oil. It's not of the purest form because you are engaged in shirk. You are still obsessing over some person, or you are obsessing over something that you want in life, and that's all you're thinking about. And in that case, even reflecting and pondering on the verses of the Quran for a couple of minutes every day is not going to do you any good. That Nurun Allah Noor is not going to take place. And so we need to start working on ourselves. And once we are able to do that, and when we are able to experience that burst of positive energy that makes us cry, that gives us goosebumps, that makes us feel this kind of love for God that we cannot even explain, then we will never suffer from anxiety, stress, and depression. We will never suffer from these things that keep pulling us down. We will never have negative thoughts. Iblis will not be able to deceive us because we've been able to finally discover God around us and inside of us. And then we will get addicted to the Quran. May Allah make it easy for us to be able to understand the words of Allah. May Allah make it easy for us to be able to gain wisdom, to activate that love that is inside, to experience His beautiful divine love. May Allah forgive us all of our sins, and may Allah grant us all salvation. Assalamu alaikum.